We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Hey friends, hi again, it's me. Every week I feel like I come back into the podcast the same way. I'm like, hi everyone, welcome back to the Paring Down podcast, or whatever I say. And then I say to myself, Shannon, next time, say something different. Welcome the people in a different way. And I just tried to do that and it felt so uncomfortable. So I'm sorry. I'm probably every single week going to be like, hey, so glad you're here. Welcome back to the Paring Down podcast. And actually right now I'm blacking out. I don't even know what I say regularly because I was so worked up about saying something different. Anyway, so this is definitely different. Anyway, hi. So happy you're here. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about books, which I feel like might get me assassinated, frankly. It's terrifying to talk about books because people have really strong opinions about decluttering them. And honestly, they should. I love that. We're going to get into all the reasons why it's hard to declutter books. And I'm going to validate you because it matters. And if you're one of the people who feels a little bit defensive about decluttering books, but you decided to still listen to this podcast, good on you for not seeing the title and being like, nope. Refuse to even think about that. You are interested in learning new perspectives and moving forward while still maintaining your sense of self. And I am proud that you are here. I think you're going to love this episode. I really do. It took me well over an hour of writing out what I wanted to say because I feel so passionately about books. And I wanted to make sure that this episode really feels practical and reasonable and that you feel understood when it comes to your attachment to your books. But before I dive in, I wanted to remind you that I do have a weekly newsletter that I would love for you to sign up for, I should say. And I'm going to be really honest with you about why. Well, there's two big reasons. Number one, I think it's really helpful. I actually have gotten many people reply to the email saying, oh my gosh, this is my favorite newsletter I've ever received because it's really simple. And so that's my ultimate hope, is that it's actually helpful for you. So that's the number one reason I want you to sign up. It follows the acronym LESS. It's called the LESS Express. And I got a kick out of it rhyming, obviously. And it's LESS in case you need to know how to spell less. And that's an acronym and it stands for listen. So I tell you what's new on the podcast with a direct link. So you can just come on over here and take a listen. E is for excerpt, and I tell you, or I write out a quote that I love about minimalism or decluttering, or a little passage from a book that I'm reading that I think will be impactful for you. The first S is for share. I often share a piece of my blog or just some thoughts I have for you on decluttering and minimalism to motivate you. Very short and sweet. And the second S is for simplify. And that's a really quick little decluttering challenge for you to try and do that week. Something like, at the end of summer, a couple weeks back, well, it's still summer technically, but maybe 2 or 3 newsletters ago, my kids were going back to school. And so it feels like the end of summer for us. And I was like, why don't you just go through your swimsuits, and declutter the ones that you didn't wear this summer, the ones that make you feel bad about yourself, the ones that you've been holding on to since your honeymoon 15 years ago, so just little things like that to think about ideas for decluttering throughout the week. So that's the LESS Express. And the number one reason I want you to read it and to get it is because I do think it'll be helpful for you, especially if you're the kind of person who has lots of emails that are tempting you from your favorite stores or, whatever it is in your inbox to be more on the consumerist side of things. It's nice to have something pop into your inbox to remind you to slow down and to be more content and intentional. The other reason, this is the one that's going to be really honest, you guys, is that speaking of books, you may remember that I wrote a book in 2020, or you may not remember that. It was called You're Completely Normal. It's still available on Amazon. And it had a wonderful release. It did really well. And it's all about those 9 areas of your life. There's 9 facets of life that can make you feel like you're behind in life. You're trying to catch up to your peers. And it really uses a lot of studies as well as personal anecdotes to talk through how there's no such thing as a timeline in life. And it's done so with a comedic air because have you met me? Anyway, so I wrote that book and I self-published that in 2020. And like I said, it did remarkably well for a self-published book for someone who at the time I had no platform whatsoever. Like, now I have my Instagram page with a fair amount of followers. Thank you very much for being here. I seriously don't even understand it. I got home from vacation and I was at like 150,000 followers on Instagram, which it's just a vanity number, right? Like I don't actually care, but I care because it feels like you guys care about what I'm saying. And that's really meaningful to me because I hope it's helpful and it makes me feel like I'm doing something right, But anyway, the point is that I'd had no such platform and it hit the top 40 hot new release list on Amazon of all of self-help. And this is back when like the top of the charts were Barack Obama had a new book out and Matthew McConaughey's book Green Lights was out, all that stuff. And my sweet little book actually like was ahead of, you guys remember, gosh, what's that show on Netflix about home, not the Home Edit, obviously love them too. But anyways, there was like a home makeover show on Netflix and they had a book that was out and my book somehow like came ahead of theirs on the hot new release list. It was crazy, you guys. But despite the fact that that went really, really well, obviously, and I encourage you to buy my book if you want. I'll put it in the show notes this week. I should probably put it in the show notes more often. I don't talk about my book, which is dumb because I do stand behind it. I think it's a great book. I just sometimes like forget about it because it was 4 years ago. But despite that doing well, I would love to publish another book that I already have outlined and I'm going to be submitting to literary agents this fall in hopes of getting a book deal. And in order to get a lit agent, it's really helpful to have a big email list because then that tells them people are interested in what you have to say. And so I'm trying to build my email list and the newsletter does that. So I'm just being really honest with you guys because if you want to support me and you like what I'm putting out and you're like, I would totally read a book by this chick, then joining the newsletter is a really helpful way for me to be able to write my second book and get it published traditionally, which will get it in those bigger bookstores and make it more widely available for everybody to read. And that's just a dream of mine. So there you go. There's my pitch to you to join the Less Express. You can get the link to sign up in the show notes as well, or just go to theexpertbeginner.com and you can go to the newsletter page on there and sign up. And like I said, it's once a week and hopefully really helpful for you and also super helpful for me. All right, let's dive into books. Okay, this is why you are here. I'm excited to talk about for many reasons. And like I said, this is hands down the most controversial subject I've come across so far when it comes to what I share on the internet. People get really defensive if I ever mention getting rid of books. Actually, my favorite troll comment of all time, like, trolls, they're the ones that just like go on to comment mean things because they're bored or whatever. So my favorite troll comment of all time was about books. And this person on Facebook said, books aren't clutter, crackhead. That was the comment. Books aren't clutter, crackhead. And it was because I, in my reel, was like carrying a box of stuff to declutter and inside were some books. Anyways, I obviously immediately showed my husband and we both laughed so hard. We thought it was so funny for whatever reason. Books aren't clutter, crackhead, that we now call each other crackhead like relatively often. So, I mean, that person pretty much influenced our lives more than I influenced them. But anyways, you can get the vibe that people get really mad sometimes about this idea of decluttering books. But I also 100% understand why decluttering books is so hard. I love books. I think most people would consider me an avid reader. I'm not one who reads like 300 books in a year. I mean, that's awesome if that's you. It's so weird now with like book talk and Instagram book world, bookstagram. There it is. Sometimes you feel like I'm reading 3 or 4 books a month and that's puny, right? We start and get to this weird comparison game, which we'll talk about. But anyway, I read like 2 to 4 books a month. I would say between 30 and 50 books a year. So to me, that's a pretty avid reader. I love books. Okay. I wrote a book, like I mentioned at the beginning of this. I wrote a book. I leave book reviews on my Instagram page in the highlights. So if you're ever looking for nonfiction or fiction, there are like 2 separate highlights on my Instagram page at pairing_down. If you ever are looking for recommendations or ideas for what to read, I leave all my reviews in those highlights. So clearly, I love books. So, since I truly do understand the deep love for books that can make them so hard to declutter, I want to start this podcast with some validation. I think that's the biggest thing that book lovers need is to feel seen and understood for why they don't want to declutter the books. I think that's why people get so defensive when they see books as a category to declutter on a quick Instagram reel or whatever they see online without a deeper dive into the emotions and thoughts attached to decluttering books. So let's start with some validation. Why is it so hard to declutter books? I think there are 5 big reasons. And of course, there's going to be reasons that I don't name here, but these are the 5 big ones I can think of. Number 1 is they are a deep source of comfort and sentimentality, right? So someone once commented on one of my reels and they said, books are my family. And that was in response to books being one of the categories I suggest decluttering before you move because they're so heavy. They like literally weigh a lot and will cost you a lot to move from home to home because movers, they charge you based on weight. Anyway, books was just on this list, right? And so someone commented on that reel and said, no way, books are my family. And that may sound dramatic, but I actually really get it, right? So books, they help us escape. They help us feel seen. They give us hope. They challenge us. We become attached to certain characters. All of these things can very much make them feel like a relationship. So I don't think it's outlandish to say books are my family because they do feel very relational, right? Another reason that they're a source of comfort is that they might have been exactly what you needed during a hard time in your life. I know that they've been that for me before. Like when we moved from Alaska to Florida, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse by bringing this story up, but it was a really hard time for me. We'll just leave it like that. It was a really hard transition from Alaska to Florida. When I lived in Alaska, I was still a pretty avid reader, but I was kind of in a nonfiction kick also because I was writing a nonfiction book. So I needed that inspo. But when we got to Florida, I was just in such a dark place that I was in Target one day and I saw this like cute little rom-com title of a book. And I thought, maybe I'll just read that. And honestly, it sent me on this fiction kick. And it was exactly what I needed. I was able to kind of escape from all these negative feelings I was experiencing at the time and feel joy, get excited about a story, relax, right, without looking at a screen, like have a moment for myself, all of these things. Books were what I needed during a hard time in my life. So they, are a deep source of comfort. Another piece of this comfort and sentimentality reason for keeping books is that they might have truly changed your life, right? Like a nonfiction book might have given you complete new perspective on the world. A fiction story might have had a theme that has just stayed with you really deeply. An example of this in my own life would be one of my favorite books is A Man Called Ove. It's pretty popular. In fact, they made it into a movie with Tom Hanks. But whenever I see that on my shelf, it reminds me of the power of relationships and acceptance and finding love where you least expect it. And when I see it on my shelf, I want to be more kind. I also feel like my life matters. When I'm feeling really down on myself, I can remember that book and remember that I matter, right? Like these are some really deep and meaningful themes and experiences when it comes to reading. And so seeing them on our shelves brings us comfort, and the idea of decluttering them can feel really, really painful. The second reason that I think it's hard to declutter books is you feel guilty of disposing of someone's hard work. I hear this a lot. There's so much respect for authors, which I love to hear. And we don't want to insult their work by donating it, right? We want to prove our loyalty and our respect to the author. And I think that's valid. And I think that's really respectable. So I hear you there. A third one of why it's hard to declutter books is you believe deeply in the power of the written word. This is one that makes it really hard for my husband. And also might be the reason you don't even read a lot, but you still have a hard time decluttering. I think that's a pretty common experience too. My husband will joke. I mean, he literally said in our wedding vows, he quoted Nick Miller from New Girl. I don't know if you watch New Girl. It's so good. Highly recommend. I think you can watch all the seasons on like Hulu or something, but we loved that show. And Nick Miller is like the main funny guy. And In it, he jokes and says, "I don't think I even know how to read. I've just memorized a lot of words." And literally in our in our wedding vows, at the church as we're getting married, he quoted that and said that one of the reasons he respects and loves me is my ability to communicate, and he loves that I'm a writer, and how it's a good balance for him because he doesn't think he even knows how to read. He's only memorized a lot of words. So that tells you something about my husband's reading habits, which are zero. But he really likes to hold on to books because of this point that he believes deeply in the power of the written word. So he wants to keep all these philosophy books that he's never really read, or maybe read a chapter of in college or whatever, because he knows that education and written thoughts are a true privilege and gift. Books really are a form of free thought. And that's why so many people do have these concerns about the reemergence of book bans in the US over the last couple years, which is really valid, right? And also under this category, it might be the way you value preserving history and preserving themes that are found inside of covers of books. And that, again, I validate. Very respectable. And I'm grateful that there are so many people still on this earth that do see the power and value the power of the written word. Okay, number 4, the reason that it's hard to declutter books is they feel like an accomplishment, right? So sometimes we just like to keep our books as trophies. They remind us that we did something good, quote, good, right, with our time instead of rotting away in front of the TV. Like, we are proud that we read. I feel this way, right? Like, even though I love reading, sometimes it is hard to open the book. You can just be distracted or just turn on TV or whatever it is. It's similar to going to the gym. It's the reason people share about going to the gym online. It's because there's a sense of pride attached to it, because it's not easy. Even the people who love working out, it is not easy every day to get up and go to the gym. So they're proud of themselves for doing that. And I think that the same thing applies to reading books. We're like, yes, I actually did something that I love, and that I had to kind of have a little bit of discipline to sit down and open the cover. And so we're proud of it. And it might be a little bit for ourselves, or even a little for others, like proof that we're intellectual. If someone comes into your home and sees all their books, they're like, oh, that's part of her identity. Like, she's a smart human being. And kind of also part of this is that they're really pretty to look at, right? And that connects back to the comfort piece. Seeing all of them on the shelves reminds us of all the lessons we've learned along the way, all the stories we've enjoyed. And that feels like an accomplishment in itself as well. Okay, and then the last reason I think it's hard to declutter books, not that it's the last one on planet Earth, but the last one I've written out, is that they're expensive, right? This is a common struggle with a lot of different decluttering categories, but we feel like we're wasting money by getting rid of books, especially if they're books that we've never ended up reading, no matter how many years have passed, right? And we always end up reaching for something new. So we never get around to reading them, but then it feels like such a huge waste of money because they're expensive. And even if you have read them, it feels like wasting money by getting rid of them, because you think about how those like $14 to $30-ish purchases add up fast. Obviously, it can be more than that, or less than that. But, I think about like cookbooks, man, those things can be like over $100. It's wild. But anyway, if you think about, like, let's say the average book, like novel or nonfiction, costs $17, and you declutter 20 of them, that's $340 right there. $340 for 20 books. That's a lot of money, right? And it might be even more than that if you're buying them at Target or Barnes & Noble, and they average closer to $30 a book. If it's $30 a book and you're decluttering 20 of them, that's $600. Okay? That is insane. And I get that. It's a tough pill to swallow to get rid of something that you spent that much money on. Okay, so there's probably a lot of other reasons you might really struggle with the idea of getting rid of books, and those reasons are just as valid, but I'm going to go ahead and talk through how to move forward based on these 5 mental roadblocks that I just talked about. So let's start with the comfort and sentimentality piece. So the popularized modern meaning of minimalism really dates back to the art movement in the 1950s and 60s. Of course, simplifying and minimalism has been around longer, but that was kind of the re-emergence of it becoming a lifestyle. And I read this online, and it just really resonates with me. The goal of minimalist art is to remove anything that distracts from the medium and form of the work, and to have the viewer respond only to what is in front of them. I think this definition and like foundation for minimalism is really powerful to consider when we're talking about living with less inside of our homes. The word distracts is really what hits me here. So, excess stuff distracts from the essence of what's most important. So, when it comes down to the books that you own, keeping hundreds and hundreds actually dilutes the comfort you're looking for. The comfort that you want to feel when you gaze at your collection is diluted when there are so many books there. And let me explain kind of how this looks in my own life. So, since I decided to keep only my absolute 100% favorites, that when I look at them, I'm like, yes, this story has stuck with me. I'm obsessed. I remember what it's about. I love it. I want my kids to read it someday, right? I now get a far greater feeling of joy when I look at my bookshelf because I'm like blasted with only the titles that bring me incredible joy. They are not lost among all the other ones that I've read that were fine or so, or maybe like I used to love, right? We have to kind of take into account where we are now versus where we were in our past and say, I used to love that, but now I don't really remember why, or other ones have become my favorite. So once you kind of get rid of all of that extra stuff and you're left with just your absolute favorite ones that bring you joy, that's what minimalism is all about. You are getting rid of whatever distracts you from the true joy of the things you love. So I encourage you to keep that in mind, that if you're looking for comfort when you look at your bookshelf, you will find more of it, not less, once you get rid of the excess. Okay, number 2, you feel guilty about the author's hard work. As an author, I'm going to tell you straight up, there is nothing that I love more than knowing that someone has passed my book off to a friend. I love that. I mean, such a compliment. It makes me feel like I did something right, that it's worth, my words are worth passing on to other people. Truly, it means so much to me. And I love the idea of like where my books have circulated. Is there one in a Goodwill somewhere? I'm not offended that someone put it there. I'm excited for who might find it, right? That's awesome. Are they in a friend of a friend of a friend's house? Cool. That's been passed on because it meant something to the people who read it. Maybe my book is somewhere in a free little library in some neighborhood. Like, actually, the kindest thing you can do for an author is to spread their words to as many people as possible rather than letting them collect dust and never reach another person on a crowded bookshelf in your home. The goal of any author I've ever known isn't just to make money, right? I'm not like, don't give my book to that person because I want them to go buy it instead. First of all, they'll probably have never heard of it or want to buy it anyway, unless someone gives it to them or tells them about it. And the biggest thing is, I don't think any author is more interested in money than they are about the craft of writing itself and wanting their message and their words and their stories to get out into the world. That is what brings us joy as authors. So spread the wealth and give these books away to a friend, put them in Goodwill, whatever you want to do with them, put them in the free little library in your neighborhood, do something to get the author's words out and don't feel guilt about it. Okay, the third reason is hard to declutter. You believe deeply in the power of the written word. I want to encourage you here that this is what libraries exist for. So similar to a store, literally being called a store is because you're storing things there that you might need, not in your home. Your home is your home. The store is a store. They are meant to store things for you until you need them. So a library houses centuries worth of preserved literature and thought. Of course, you might say, but what about the book bans? To which I say, I agree. I mean, those can be really scary. And at the same time, you can decide to keep a smaller amount of important historical, philosophical, or like deeply thematic books. You can keep a smaller amount of those because no matter what, listen, you're not going to preserve all the written thoughts of the world in history on your own. You are simply not going to do that. So why not just preserve the works that matter to you, the themes that impacted you when you read them, the messages you find particularly important and dear? Take the pressure off of yourself to be the holder of all things important in the world. I think there's a little bit of ego wrapped up in that, frankly. It's also just a futile effort that distracts you from the topics or messages that matter most to you. So just keep those. Okay, number 4, they feel like an accomplishment. The way our world is set up, everything has become a bit of a race or like a comparison game. This is why I have a love-hate relationship with Goodreads. I use Goodreads religiously. For those of you who don't know, Goodreads is an app where you can track what books you want to read. There's reviews from millions of readers. You track what page you're on as you're reading. You can make reading goals for the year. And it's fun. It's fun to keep track of what you're doing and what you're reading. And for me, I have found Goodreads to be really helpful to keep my physical to be read pile down, because I can just go back and see in my Goodreads, oh, I want to read this. And then inevitably, when we change our minds, you haven't bought the book and it's sitting in a physical TBR pile, right? You could just be like, oh, I'm glad I didn't actually acquire that book. And it can stay on your Goodreads for when you maybe find it interesting again. I love Goodreads. I also don't think there's anything wrong with having a reading goal. I think sometimes it's important to prioritize the things that matter to us, like reading, right? The problem is with reading goals, you can become less interested in the act of reading and more interested in simply trying to chase this accomplishment. And that's not the point of reading, right? Also, we see what our friends are reading on Goodreads, and there's the comparison game of what they're reading and how much they're reading. Also, I struggle with having access to all of these reviews, because then you start to question how you actually feel about a book, how you felt about it. I know I do this. I go back after I finish it. I don't read the reviews before I start for the most part. I might see how many stars it has on average, because if it has 2 stars, I'm probably not going to read it, right? But if generally it's 4-ish stars, I'm like, okay, this is worth reading. But then afterwards, I might go read specific reviews, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, am I super dumb because I liked that book? Because then there's all the reviews being like, anyone who reads this book and says they like it has no taste, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me, right? And it's dumb. It's stupid. You get to like what you like. I say this about wine too. I used to drink a lot more wine than I do and be way more into wine. And people would be like, what's a good bottle? I'm like, whatever one tastes good to you. Yeah, that's good wine. So that's a good book to you, whatever one you enjoyed reading, right? Anyway, if reading has become another way to prove yourself to other people, or prove to yourself that you are, I don't know, a good, smart person, then it's time to slow down and get back to your own reasons for why you want to read, which really should revolve around learning, growing, relaxing, enjoying, all of those things, not to meet a quota that you set for yourself on Goodreads or to impress other people. And I also want to make this point. Just because a book is not on your shelf at home, for the sense of accomplishment that we're talking about here, just because a book is not on your shelf does not mean that you didn't read it. Okay. Even if you don't remember every last book that you've read, that still doesn't mean that reading it was a waste of time. Just because it's off your shelf and now you forget that you read it. So stories and connection to characters and themes and wistfulness and whatever, they seep their way into your worldview. I say this about how I don't remember every last interaction and experience with my mom before she passed away. But just because I don't have a picture or an item to remind me of every last second that we had together does not mean that those moments didn't matter. So part of the human experience is that we simply don't remember everything. And yet all of those forgotten moments add up and make us who we are today. Same with what you've read. The important things have stuck with you, whether you can identify them or not. And that is the true accomplishment. And last, the thing that makes it hard to declutter is that they're expensive. So let me share here what I say about any decluttering category that is hard to part with because of the money attached. That can be clothing, it can be appliances, whatever. So first of all, you're not getting that money back in your account by keeping that item. It's not making you any richer, right? It's a sunken cost. But second, this is what I really try and harp on, is that you do not have to kick yourself for past choices or hold on to them to prove to yourself that it was a worthy purchase. This is the sunk cost fallacy, but you're holding on to it because you've already invested so much time into holding on to it that you're trying to wait for the moment you feel like you got your money's worth, whether it means you read it again or you just hold on to it forever because that's proof that it was a worthy purchase or whatever. You guys, I'm sorry, Chai. I feel like she's part of the podcast now, my dog. I can't get through an episode without her barking in the last 3 weeks. It's so bizarre. But the point is, you don't have to kick yourself for those past choices or prove anything to yourself that it was a worthy purchase, because you can see it as you got your money's worth at the very moment you purchased it because of that excitement and that dopamine hit you felt at the time you acquired it, right? Like the time that you grabbed that book off the shelf and you put it in your cart at Target, or you pushed buy on Amazon, which is not as satisfying, but there's still this like excitement that it's coming to you and you're going to read it, right? And seeing it as getting your money's worth at that moment through the excitement and dopamine hit is a gentler way of looking at it instead of being like, what a waste of money. I'm such a dummy. And importantly, it can motivate you moving forward to take a pause the next time you're about to make a similar purchase in the future that begins to give you that rush of excitement when you put it in the cart. You can step back and be like, oh, yeah, I felt that about all these other books I bought but never read, or that I bought and read but now have been sitting on my shelf for years. And it can change your consumption habits moving forward. Okay. So, in that sense, it's also not a waste. Not only did you get that rush of excitement and dopamine when you bought it, so that's worth something, but you also have the lesson that you've learned moving forward, and that's hugely valuable as well. And now you're probably thinking, but if I don't buy books anymore, how will I read? Great question. And you probably know what I'm about to say because I've said it a million times. The library. You guys, I love the library so much. And I hear you, all of these little like people on your shoulder about to say things to you, like the little person on your shoulder being like, but I don't like using the library because of this. And I don't like using the library because of that. And I don't really want to use the library because of this. You know, do you hear those little voices in your head right now? Let's talk about them. Okay. Not only can you still read pretty much whatever you want for free, the library has some other really big benefits. The first is that you still get that dopamine hit when you find a book that you get excited about on the shelf, or they email you saying your hold is ready for pickup, or your electronic copy is ready to download on your e-reader. When I walk in there and I get my books I've been waiting for, I'm a hard copy kind of a girl for the most part. So I physically walk into the library to get my books. I do not have time to browse the shelves. So I use the app. It's really simple. The website, I just like go on and I can search the title that is a book I've been interested in. Let's say like The Women by Kristen Hanna, right? That's a big one I've been wanting to read. I go on there and I just type that in. It tells me if they have it, which they almost always do, and I push place hold, and it's either ready immediately, it'll tell me, or I'm number whatever on the list, and it's probably going to be like a 5-week hold or whatever it is. And it might be longer than that, and we're going to get into that in a second. But the point is, when I get that email that's like, your book is ready for pickup, I tell you what, that is better than any time I've tossed something into my cart at Target, right? I am so excited. And I walk in there and I get my books. Like, what was my recent haul? It felt so good. I was so excited. I got 4,000 Weeks, which is so good. I just started it. Funny Story by Emily Henry. Just finished it. Oh, and the fourth one in the ACOTAR series, like the novella. I read the first 3 last year. I loved them, but then I needed a break and I also wanted to read different kinds of genres. And so now I'm getting back into it. Everyone tells me book 5 with Nesta is like the best one. I guess technically book 4 if you don't count the novella. I don't really know how to count it, but whatever. The point is I got that one too. And it's just like, I walk out of there and I'm so excited. And I promise you, you get the same dopamine hit. It's really exciting. And yes, a brand new book can feel fun to hold in your hands and they smell really good. And I like 100% understand that. But it's powerful to recognize that the new book feeling lasts for literally 5 seconds, right? The second you start reading the first page, suddenly it does not matter anymore how new the book is. The content becomes the best part about it. So I think there's a level of self-control of recognizing that really shouldn't be the reason that you buy a book, because that's fleeting. And if ever I need like a new book hit, frankly, I still go to Barnes and Noble and just like walk around sometimes, or to a local bookstore, or the book section of Target or Walmart or whatever. You can pick them up and you can flip through them, but I just don't buy them there. I might even get some ideas when I'm there, but then I immediately pull out my phone, go to my library app or go to my Goodreads app and add them to my want to read list, right? And then I can go to the library later on, or the library app, and like see if they're available. I don't have to buy them, but I can still get that like yummy smell of fresh pages. I hope that doesn't make me weird, but if you're listening to this episode, I feel like you get it, you know? Okay, another big thing about the library, you get that dopamine hit. It forces you to not only follow trends. So Book Talk and Bookstagram, they're great. I fully love them, right? They give us ideas for what to read. They keep us excited about reading. It's kind of modernized the love of reading. I think that's great. However, there are a lot of incredible books that don't ever get popular online. So by using the library, you might have to wait a little longer for those popular titles, like I was saying. But that's okay. That doesn't have to be a negative thing. That can be a positive thing, because it gives you reason in the interim while you wait for that popular book, while you've placed a hold on it, to go back and place a hold or immediately get a book that you've been meaning to read forever that isn't as popular, so you can get it immediately, or you can get a book that was popular years and years ago. I know I went and got The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. That was like massive in 2009. I had never read it, and it didn't feel quite as top of list as all these like new books that spark my interest right now. But I was waiting for, I think, Funny Story at the time. And I was like, well, I think I would like that book. And there's got to be a reason it was popular in 2009, right? And I read it and I was obsessed with it. It was so good. And it's a reminder that books that are good are still good 10, 15, 30, 50 years later. So they're worth reading. And by waiting for these new books that are so popular you can't get them immediately at the library, while waiting for them, it actually encourages you to go back and explore and invest your time in these other books that can probably have a huge impact on you that you just were never at the top of your list because you want the newer stuff. And then you still get the newer stuff, right? And then, like I said, I just finished Funny Story. So I really benefited twofold. I got to read the book I wanted to read, and I was forced to read a book that I probably wouldn't have bought otherwise. Another great thing about the library, I think this is obvious, you're not going to have the book clutter. You're not going to have to feel bad about getting rid of it or that you wasted money or all of these other things. You just bring it back to the library. I haven't had to deal with book clutter in a million years. And if you really love a book that you read at the library, you can, of course, go buy it then. If you're like, I need to have this on my shelf, right? Like there are certain books I want on my shelf. Atomic Habits, obsessed with it. I have a copy of it because that's important to me. But read it first and see if you're going to love it. And if then you absolutely want to see that on your shelf, you can buy it after the fact. You know what I mean? To get that same whatever dopamine hit of seeing your favorite books on your shelf. But the point is that using the library is going to cut down on your clutter massively. Another big thing, it encourages you to read more. Similar to that point I made about how you're going to be reading things that aren't always the most popular things, and that will benefit your life. You only have 3 weeks. Maybe if you're able to renew it twice, if others aren't waiting, you'll hit that 9 weeks of being able to hold on to a book. But ultimately, since it's kind of timed, you dedicate yourself more intentionally to reading. And that can be a really important thing instead of just being like, I can get to it when I can get to it. And then you never actually get to it. And then you've wasted the money and you feel guilty and all of this stuff. In reality, you kind of have to read it or you got to bring it back, right? And listen, if you end up not having the time, that's fine. You can always check it out again. Like I did that with Tom Lake. I got it. I was really excited about it. I didn't have time to read it. And then I had to return it because people were waiting. And it's still a book I really want to read. And so I'll just check it out again once I am at a point that feels good to get it. You know what I mean? So it's totally fine. You don't have to feel like it's the end of the world if you don't get to the book that you checked out. I actually do this pretty often. Like I just get overexcited about buying too many books or putting too many books on hold or whatever at the library. And before using the library, I would do that at the bookstore. I would get like 5 books. I'd pay $100. I'd just drop $100 on all these books $100 on books. That was like weirdly hard to say. And then I would never end up reading them, right? Because my interest would get piqued elsewhere. And then I'd want to buy those and read those. And then next thing I knew, I had all these books sitting around me and all this money I'd spent and all of the guilt associated with that and everything. So sometimes like I said, I check out more books than I can read. And instead of renewing them, sometimes I realize a different book has become more interesting to me. So I return that one and I check out the newer one instead. And the other one stays on my Goodreads list as a possibility for the future with no guilt. Like I don't have to feel bad that I changed my mind. It's not like that's my only chance to read it. But then if I never do decide that it's top of my list again, I haven't spent the money on it to sit on the shelf and make me feel bad, you know? Okay, last big thing about using the library is by using the library, you are supporting one of the best free public resources in our country. So we must keep libraries relevant by using them. They hold history, like we talked about, and preserve thoughts. But they're also a safe place for teenagers to go after school if their parents can't pick them up from school or whatever reason, they need somewhere safe to go, they can go to the library. It's for people to build community with each other through weekly classes and events. I think about especially the senior community. They need to have the sense of community and often find that in libraries. And it's a beautiful space for them to connect and is wildly important for their well-being. But not just for that. I mean, you have knitting clubs and you have chess clubs and you have all of these different beautiful events that the library puts on that brings people together. They're a great place for children to learn to love to read at story time. Right? Gosh. And I think about the underprivileged people who come to use a computer to apply for jobs or just to stay connected with the world around them. I could go on and on and on. I love using libraries as a free place to go work. When my kids are home on the weekend and I have something I need to get done, or even during the week when they're at school sometimes, and I just want to get out of the house, I go work at the library. It's an amazing thing. I can just go sit at a desk there and be surrounded by books, which puts me at ease because I freaking love books. And I get my work done there. I mean, it's just a fantastic place to be. So please use your library. You save so much money, but there are all these other benefits as well. So that sums up this episode about decluttering books. I hope you feel seen and understood and not like I think or anyone thinks that you're crazy for wanting to hold on to your books. Obviously, you're not. All of these reasons we talked about are really valid, but I hope that through talking through them, it's given you a little bit of motivation and inspiration to reevaluate what books you own, to lighten the load at home, to declutter a little bit, and ultimately experience a life with less that makes space for what truly matters. That's what we're doing here on Paring Down. So thanks for being here and can't wait to have you back next week. You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face. So thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at paring_down, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.